So anyway, this is my title, Design by Vital, How Word and Web 2.0 Settings and Templates Are Affecting College Composition. I want to give the quick caveat that I don't think this is just for any level of writing. I don't think this is just college level. I was talking to my mom on the way in. She was a high school English teacher, public school English teacher for over 40 years, God bless her. And I remember when I called and told her I was going to be an English major, she started crying, and not because she was happy. I never thought I would be here, and she was saying yesterday how thrilled she was, and I said, you know, coming to this just makes me so appreciative of all the wonderful work that's done in high school and everywhere, really. Also, I don't think this is for any one kind of writer, which I probably should tell you briefly about myself. I am a PhD student at the University of Michigan in the Joint Program in English and Education. I'm actually studying collaborative composition and technology, so kind of everything I'm going to talk about today. Please feel free to email me or check out my web space if you want to. Easily available on Twitter and Facebook, but I thought I'd let you do that if you want. And also there's a lot of materials that I put on the web that you can easily Google that are kind of semi-related to what I'm going to talk about today. So if you have any questions, obviously you can contact me or you can just Google me and you find that. Very briefly, I have a pretty good track record of getting invited to conferences. And I think that's because I come up with titles like this, which are like broad and vague enough that I could either be talking about anything or not talk about anything at all. And this precocious one is no different. It's kind of like, it's impossible to deliver on this challenge. So I apologize in advance. What I am going to try to do today, though, is give you 4 takeaways, 4 ways of looking at electronic and online text that I think you can use for your own education, but also hopefully pass along to your students or your colleagues, etc. And it's just one way of looking at these that's been really helpful for me to start thinking about what exactly is going on, what are the effects of the practices of writing when we enter stuff like this today. I'm going to be really careful today not to talk about what's good and what's bad. I'm going to try not to pass any judgment on whether or not default settings and templates are a good thing. For example, in this PowerPoint slide, you'll see it's organized in a simple hierarchical fashion. It delivers information clearly, cleanly, and more or less effectively. I even tried to jazz it up with some clip art there, which I'm very proud of. But as we start looking at this, I want this to kind of be in our background, in the back of our heads for the rest of today, and start asking ourselves questions such as, is this an engaging way of delivering information? Is it rhetorically aware of the audience? And finally, is it effective? Another thing I want to put in the back of our heads is work from Gunther Kress, who actually has the quote, "Layout is beginning to change textual structures, that much is clear. With such changes come others, which change not only deeper meanings and textual forms, but also the structures of ideas, of conceptual arrangements, and of the structures of our knowledge. Such seemingly superficial changes are altering the very channels in which we think. Bullet points, like the ones here, are bullets of information. They are fired at us, abrupt and challenging, not meant to be continuous and coherent, not inviting reflection and consideration, not insinuating themselves in our thinking. They are hard and direct, and not to be argued with." I think one of the effects of this hard and direct delivery is the creation of these binaries, or binaries like these. And I think looking at these is one way of looking at contemporary and online writing. What I propose today for us is a postmodern approach to this, to show that there is no one way of looking at these binaries, and no one side of this is any better or any worse than the other, but that there are multiple ways into it. The most important factor of the binaries today, I think, is this issue of authority. The reason I think authority is important is because authority is always acting upon us as writers, whether we know it or not. So being more explicit in our identification and discussion of this factor, I believe that we can open up new lines of inquiry into how we theorize and practice modern writing. To do so, I'm actually going to be appropriating work from Elizabeth Atkinson, who is a scholar in London, or not London, in the UK someplace. And I need to state up front that her article here, which I found very helpful, actually does not talk explicitly about writing or about technology. But I found it very helpful as just a way of kind of theorizing and thinking about these things that could really lead us into thinking more about what are the possibilities of these technologies. So in the first one, the authority of power and knowledge, I'm actually going to talk to you about prescriptive approaches to grammar and spelling and the role that default visual settings play, especially in Microsoft Word. Second one, authority of models of learning. I'm going to talk about the predominance of linear print culture, even as we supposedly move to a new media world in all of our classrooms. The third one, authority of identity. I'm going to talk about how student users online are writing themselves as text and how there's certain affordances in doing so. I'll use MySpace as an example there. And then the final one, authority of language. I'm actually going to talk about the default prompts that popular websites give us and the way that websites actually teach us to use them. So hopefully you can follow along with all of those. The first stop then is Microsoft Word. For those of you who are using a modern or the latest version of Word, you'll know that spell and grammar check is actually the default setting. It's always on. You have to go and turn it off. So you know that when you do this, if they do something that's a little bit questionable, you get a little green squiggly line. If you actually do something they consider wrong against the rules, they give you a red squiggly line. I think this is important to think about in terms of the authority and power binary area that I was talking about, because it raises a number of issues. The first issue is that student writers may begin using spell and grammar check as a crutch, knowing that their spelling and constructions need not be perfect because this invisible grammarian will take care. And I want to note that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe students shouldn't be worrying about the rules as they're in the invention process. However, another way of looking at this as a potentially bad thing is by authors Mickey and Erickson, who actually give us this quote. It gives grammar and style, both narrowly defined by a digital program, a precedence, at least temporarily, over content, mode of discourse, and other rhetorical concerns. This precedence could well have a negative effect on the development of writability, and I'll get to exactly what some of those possibilities may be. One of the rhetorical concerns such a foreground and spelling and grammar leave behind are the visual rhetorical concerns of font choices, something we really take for granted. And at one point, these were all default settings, not only in Word, but on Macs and PCs. For me, as an academic, and I'm sure people of my age or older even, Times New Roman is the academic font. That's expected, and when I see it, I instantly know that there's some kind of ethos there behind it. But then a couple years ago, we started getting Calibri, a sans serif, rounded, more humanistic, and students were turning in papers, and something just wasn't quite right. I knew something wasn't what I was used to. And it led to a discussion about this, about why did students choose this particular font? More explicitly, I was asking, why aren't you using Times New Roman? And the response I got back from the most was that they just didn't think about it. It was the default. It took us into a really interesting area of talking about visual rhetoric through design, but also through default settings about fonts, culminating in one class where I actually showed the documentary Helvetica. Have people seen Helvetica or know about it? You have? Cool. All right, if you haven't, it's a documentary about Helvetica. Which is either as interesting as that sounds or as boring as that sounds. My students are on the latter side. But it's still opened up, and I'll tell you what, especially a lot of you probably flew here, took a bus here or something else, go look around any transport area and you're going to see Helvetica everywhere. That's the one area you definitely see it. Perhaps the most salient issue raised by this invisible grammarian, though, is that it presents a new type of authority that student writers may or may not be consciously comparing and contrasting to us, their instructors. Word spelling grammar check identifies problems and fixes them according to strict laws. It supports the binary of right and wrong in writing that many writing instructors try to resist. It becomes an invisible authority of power and knowledge that we as instructors need to recognize and at least openly discuss with our students. Moving on to the second area, we have authoritative models of learning. Specifically, I want to talk about, again, the supposed shift from print culture, linear-based arguments, to a digital culture and kind of hyperlinked and hypermedia way of looking at arguments. And the best example we have for this is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a darling of open source Web 2.0 movement on the web, crowdsourcing hundreds of thousands, probably millions by now, of pieces of information and turning audiences into authors. No one can contend that the site hasn't defined a genre of websites by embracing the editing tools afforded by interactive Web 2.0 software. However, as we look at this example, you'll see that it looks a lot like a print encyclopedia. We have kind of an etymology up there, we have cross-references, we have a little bit of an abstract, and then we essentially have a table of contents, which you would probably find in any Encyclopedia Britannica from 50 years ago, let alone from 10 years ago. This is a point that has been brought up by compositionists such as Jeff Rice. He says, images and hyperlinks offer students the opportunity to present various connections whose overlap is meant to produce new meaning, which is a good thing. While it is open in the sense that it encourages readers to contribute to its development, Wikipedia's entries, layout, and organization do not convey multiple meanings and possibilities. Instead, entries replicate the fixed meanings a print encyclopedia might offer. So in this way, we can see the authority of a predominant model of learning is often still based in print-based, linear structured arguments, which is not what Web 2.0 and hyperlinks are supposed to afford us.